أهلا وسهلا فيكم متابعينا بحلقة جديدة من برنامج يلا. بظل التحولات الكبرى التي تشهدها منطقة الشرق الأوسط من تراجع النفوذ الإيراني في سوريا ولبنان إلى إعادة رسم التحالفات الإقليمية، وطبعا مع وصول إدارة الرئيس ترامب الحازمة إلى البيت الأبيض، تبقى المنطقة في مرحلة انتقالية ومحورية في هذا المشهد المعقد. فبين الضغوطات الخارجية على المنطقة، ملفات مثل سوريا ولبنان، التدخلات الإيرانية، نفوذ طهران المستمر، وطبعا فيما يخص العراق التحديات الراسخة في سعيه لترسيخ سيادته وبناء مستقبل مستقر، اليوم نتحدث عن ملفات متعددة. للحديث عن هذه الملفات نستضيف معنا ديفيد شينكر، مساعد وزير الخارجية الأمريكي الأسبق لشؤون الشرق الأدنى، والذي سنناقش معه كل هذه القضايا والتغيرات الحاصلة في المنطقة، ونناقش معه هذه التحولات. تابعوا معنا هذا اللقاء ضمن برنامج يلا. Thank you so much for joining us today. The first time for you on Yalla, David Sheinker.
Well, good to be with you, Haley.
It's been so long. I used to have you a lot in my previous shows, and I'm really happy to have you again. There's so many things to talk about in terms of the developments across the Middle East, but we cannot not talk about right now what's happening in Syria because of all of the developments that we've been seeing. Unfortunate things have been happening. We saw some developments in terms of some ambushes that happened against the new government in Syria's forces. Of course, the remnants of the Assad regime that are now in the coastal area. The Iranian regime announced that they are forming, or they have already formed, some sort of another Islamist extremist group. Probably they want to, launch attacks against Israel from Syria. We have the Ahmad Shara government, which also there are a lot of still questions about them, given that they are also Islamists, right? So many players, of course, the SDF. But I wanted to ask you about what just happened. Obviously this is really dangerous and very alarming to see that the Assad regime and the Iranian regime are actually trying to regroup in Syria. But what is your assessment of the situation and also of the developments that just happened? Like, what really happened?
We've all seen the video. It's horrific. And yet, in a way, to be expected. This is a country that's been through a horrific civil war. Finally, the Assad regime has been toppled. Among Assad's supporters, there are those, and probably plenty of those, who don't accept the new Syria, the new government, the new arrangements, the change in the Alawites' privileged position in society, some people clinging to the former system, the former regime. And at the same time, this is a regime, of course, that murdered the better part of 500,000 Syrian civilians. Retribution is regrettable, it's awful, it's horrific, and yet to be expected in a way. And so you hope that within this fragile security situation that there will be restraint, that the government, such as it is, will step in and prevent these type of massacres, will try and maintain security. But this is a moment where, absent significant foreign involvement of beneficent actors, Europe or others, that bad actors will take advantage. And I think the Iranians lost the most with the fall of the Assad regime and are looking for an opportunity to play once again a pernicious role in Syria.
What is your assessment of the current government in Syria? We know that they are Islamists, but they're also saying that they no longer have those ideologies. There's a lot of pragmatism that we're seeing. And, some people hope that this is true, but at the same time, there are doubts and speculations and fears.
Well, listen, I know that there's an awful lot of concern about the new government, the new regime, the new Islamists that are in power in Damascus. We have to first, I think, put it in the context of what just ended, which was an Assad regime that had filled the dungeons of Syria with regime opponents, had murdered, 500,000 people, had driven 6 to 10 million Syrians, mostly Sunni Muslims, into exile. The killings and the forced, departure of all these people resembles, on one hand, genocide, and on the other hand, ethnic cleansing, right? So we just ended this regime, 60 years? That was so horrific. And now we get Ahmed al-Shara, Jolani, whatever you want to call him, who is, an unabashed Islamist. He was at one time with Al-Qaeda, he was at one time with ISIS, but for 8 years or so in Idlib, he actually fought these groups, right? I have no doubt that he is an Islamist. There are bad elements, former Islamist foreign fighters in the Ministry of Defense, in the government, people who are designated terrorists by the United States government. This is a work in progress. He has said many of the right things about wanting to have a tolerant, inclusive government. And I think he still needs more time, or we need more time, to see if he is sincere about what he has said. And also, whether he will, govern Syria in a way that makes Syria and the mosaic of different religions and ethnicities that comprise Syria, and make it a place that is livable. This is not going to be optimal, but let's stipulate there is not really any Arab country in the region where there is democracy, tolerance, etc. You have, some degrees of tolerance in different countries, but in many, these are either repressive or, and so I think we should have reasonable expectations of what can be accomplished here.
I wanted to kind of go into Iraq. So Iraq is a country where there's a lot of tension under the surface. We've seen that, of course, they have been, trying to play a role, including right now when we're, talking about Syria, for example. They did try to send their, Iranian-backed militias into Syria. They have been continuing, to have that influence in Iraq, the Iranian-backed militias. What do you think the objective of this administration, giving the U.S. presence in Iraq and the continuation of Iran influence in Iraq?
Well, listen, I was in Iraq twice last month. I think they're very concerned, on the one hand, about the fall of the Assad regime and having what's going to happen to ISIS, whether they're going to start to come over the border, whether there's going to be instability in Syria on a long-term basis. On the other hand, they're concerned about what the United States is going to do, whether Trump not only is going to pull U.S. forces out of Syria, but eventually out of Iraq, right, and downgrade U.S. engagement with the government there. The president put out on March 4th, I believe, a presidential security memorandum talking about a resumption of maximum pressure campaign against Iran, and talked in great depth about preventing about Iraq being used as sort of the financial lung for Iran, and also talked about the Hashid, about these Iranian-backed militia. Last year, October and November, I believe, the Hashid sent something like 150 rockets and drones from Iraq into Israel. And at one point, the Israelis sent a letter to the UN saying that they're prepared to defend themselves. And there hasn't been an attack against Israel emanating from Iraq in about 7 months, because I think the Hashid understood that Israel was getting prepared to launch attacks against targets of these Iranian-backed militia in Iraq.
It's interesting because also we are, talking about two things here. We want to prevent Iraq from being Iran's lungs, right? Especially now with the maximum pressure campaign returning soon. But at the same time, we don't want to be as involved. We don't want to be, in the endless wars. But, you can't not be in these wars to prevent further wars, right? Like, it's basically the chicken or the egg, you kind of like have to be present.
Yeah, U.S. presence, I think, is a stabilizing factor. And if there's less violence in Iraq, and right now they're going through, a very prolonged period of quiet there, and security. If this persists, if the quiet persists, and there's a U.S. presence, there'll be more foreign direct investment. Maybe Western energy companies will, return to Iraq. This is something they very much want in terms of economic development. And really the U.S. presence is the key to that.
But a lot of people in the Middle East, and I want to tell you, David, basically look at the Trump administration as a tough administration. We're going to be confronting the Iranian threat, the Iranian nuclear threat. You were part of the Trump administration in the last term, and we did have the maximum pressure campaign, and Qasem Soleimani was taken out. But people were hoping that the nuclear project of Iran would be dismantled. There's a lot of fear and a lack of trust, and rightly so, about the idea of a deal, quote unquote, with Iran, because we've seen what happened with the Obama deal. We know that Iran is very close to having a nuclear weapon. What does that deal mean? Does it mean the dismantlement of the entire nuclear project? Because that would be probably the only thing that would make sense. If not, then what are we doing? What does that mean exactly, and how realistic it is, in your opinion, to actually have a nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, listen, Trump has put into place, once again, the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. I fear that it will not be as effective as the last time, because you have a closer Iranian alliance relations with China and Russia that will help them to evade sanction. Of course, there is 2 million barrels of smuggled oil per day coming out of Iran, most of which is being purchased by China. And we are currently engaged in a trade war with China, or I think relations are, by all accounts, at a very low point. So the impact of that is on one side of the equation. On the other side, Trump has made clear. He sent a letter to Ali Khamenei, we're interested in a deal. He's made clear he wants to go back to a nuclear deal. I think the model for this is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Trump canceled it during the last administration, then renegotiated another agreement called the United States, Canada, Mexico agreement. And it is modestly better. Not an enormous change, but in some ways more beneficial to the United States. And I think this is essentially what Trump is trying to do, but with no sunset clause, right? To end the sort of the infrastructure and to really incentivize it, economically. I'm not sure the Iranians are going to go for this. The thing they fear more than anything else is the threat to the regime. They call the Velvet Revolution, that there'll be American or Western culture that infiltrates the country, and this will weaken the theocratic, sort of austere, repressive nature of the government over time. I don't think they want to open up. I don't think they want to have this, economic development that opens them to the West. I think they, are very comfortable. They'd like sanction relief, but they want to maintain their grasp.
Especially that the people in Iran are so ready for this. I mean, they are ready to be, free and reopen to the world.
My concern overall, but one is that, in the last administration, there was talk about human rights, women's rights, minority rights in Iran. I don't think we're going to have that type of emphasis coming from this second term Trump administration. The other thing.
Why not?
Because human rights isn't high on the list for these folks, frankly. The other thing is really they got the priority. The priority is the existential threat posed by nuclear Iran. So they're narrowly focused on this. And I fear there's a chance they will not include other elements of incredibly problematic Iranian behavior in this deal. And I'm thinking about the support for the regional militia, right? We still have the Houthis in Yemen, Ansar Allah, that has shut down Bab al-Mandeb and is policing, or determining what ships go into the Red Sea or not. We still have, which by the way puts Iran, in charge of not only the Straits of Hormuz, but the Bab al-Mandeb, some of the two most important, transit points for energy in the world. The other is, they have the Hashid, they have other militia in the region that they will continue to try and support. If we don't tangle with this, we're going to have to deal with it at a later point.
A lot of people in the region, when they see this, what's happening in terms of, previous, of course, U.S. administration, now we see President Trump, America first, and there is the fear, there are the threats that the people are facing. Of course, Israel is the one that's confronting the Iranian-backed militias, but these militias are threatening and actually destroying so many of those neighboring countries, Arab countries, including, of course, now we're talking about Syria. Of course, there's Lebanon, Hezbollah still there. It's weakened, but it's still there. Iraq, but also the Gulf states are also being threatened. So when we talk about the nuclear project as a threat to all the region and to humanity, right? And people start looking towards Israel because Israel has been the one that's been very consistent, one confronting, it's basically taken a leadership role in the region. And they've been very clear about the Iran nuclear project. But would the Trump administration provide Israel or support Israel if Israel does decide on, taking out this nuclear facilities or the nuclear project if it has to?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Certainly at this point, Israel can't do the job by themselves. They don't have the platforms. They don't have the correct type of bunker buster munition to go after a place like Natanz or Fordow, these facilities that are dug into mountains. This isn't like dropping 2,000-pound bombs on Hassan Nasrallah's house, in the bunker underneath. This is going through a mountain. So not only do you need the bunker buster munition, something like a 23,000-pound bomb, but you need the delivery system, which is like a B-1 bomber. Right? Israel doesn't have either of those platforms. So this may take some time. I think that's in the cards. I think that's where the administration is going, but I think they want to give negotiations a chance before they go down that avenue. But ultimately, that may be where we end up.
Well, I want to thank you so much, David Sheinkar, for joining us today. And I would love to have you, of course, again on Yalla in the future to discuss all of the ongoing things that are happening. And we'll see you soon.
Yalla, thanks.
Yalla, thank you.